Diana Robinson stood in front of her full-length mirror, carefully adjusting her simple navy blazer. At 42, she was one of the youngest black women to become a CEO in the corporate world. Today, however, she wasn't dressing like a CEO. Her usual designer clothes were replaced with basic business wear from a department store, and her naturally curly hair was styled simply. The morning sun filtered through her penthouse apartment windows as she thought about the task ahead. 3 weeks ago, she had purchased Marshall and Reed, a mid-sized company with offices across the country. The acquisition had been smooth, but the anonymous complaints she received about the Seattle regional office were troubling. Multiple people had reported discrimination in hiring practices, particularly against people of color. "Sometimes you need to see things for yourself," Diana muttered, picking up her altered resume. She had simplified her qualifications, removing her MBA from Harvard and her executive positions. On paper, she now appeared to be a mid-level manager seeking a lateral move. Her assistant, James, knocked on her home office door. "The car is ready, Ms. Robinson. Are you sure you want to do this alone?" Diana smiled, tucking the resume into a plain folder. "Absolutely. If I bring an entourage, someone might recognize me. This needs to be done quietly." She had purposely avoided visiting the Seattle office during the acquisition, knowing this day would come. The drive to the Seattle regional office took 45 minutes. Diana used this time to get into character, practicing introducing herself as Diana Wells, an experienced manager looking for new opportunities. Her driver dropped her off 2 blocks away from the office building to maintain her cover. Walking into the lobby, Diana immediately noticed the lack of diversity among the employees entering and leaving the building. In a city as diverse as Seattle, this seemed unusual. She made a mental note while checking her phone, which was secretly recording. At the security desk, a young guard barely glanced at her before pointing toward the elevators. "15th floor for interviews," he said dismissively. Diana noticed how he was much more cheerful with the white candidates who came after her. The elevator ride gave Diana time to observe her fellow passengers. 2 other job candidates were with her, a young Asian woman and a middle-aged white man. The guard had given the white man a visitor's badge, while both Diana and the Asian woman had been sent up without one. The 15th floor was busy with activity. Diana approached the receptionist, a blonde woman in her 20s who was chatting on her phone. After waiting for 3 minutes while the receptionist finished her personal call, Diana finally got her attention. "I'm here for an interview with Mr. Stevens," Diana said politely. The receptionist looked her up and down. "Take a seat, he's running behind." She turned back to her phone immediately, not bothering to ask Diana's name or check any schedule. Diana sat down in the waiting area, where 4 other candidates were already waiting. She noticed a pattern. The white candidates were offered water and told specific wait times, while others were left to sit without any information. Taking out her phone, Diana pretended to check emails while actually documenting everything she observed. After 45 minutes, she watched as candidates who had arrived after her were called in first. The Asian woman from the elevator had already left, frustrated by the long wait and obvious discrimination. Finally, after an hour and 15 minutes, the receptionist called out, "Diana Wells?" As Diana stood up, she took a deep breath. Through the glass walls, she could see Marcus Stevens in his office, a man in his 50s with graying hair and an expensive suit. He was laughing at something on his computer screen, not even looking up as Diana was led to his office. This was the moment of truth. Diana had heard numerous complaints about Marcus Stevens, the regional manager. Former candidates had reported inappropriate comments, touching, and blatant discrimination, but they had been too afraid to file formal complaints, fearing retaliation in the industry. What Marcus Stevens didn't know was that the woman walking into his office wasn't just another job candidate. She was his boss, the CEO of the entire company, and she was about to witness his behavior firsthand. Diana straightened her blazer one last time before entering his office. Her hidden recorder was running, her mind was sharp, and she was ready to expose the truth about the toxic culture in her company's Seattle office. The next hour would change everything. Marcus Stevens didn't stand up when Diana entered his office. He kept his eyes on his computer screen for another 30 seconds, making her wait. Finally, he looked up, and his expression changed noticeably as he assessed her appearance. Well, what do we have here?" Marcus said, standing up slowly. He walked around his desk, moving too close to Diana as he gestured toward the chair. "Please, make yourself comfortable." Diana sat down, keeping her expression neutral despite her growing disgust. Her hidden recorder captured everything as Marcus leaned against his desk, directly in front of her, rather than sitting in his own chair. His knee was almost touching hers. "So, Diana Wells," he said, driving out her fake name. "Your resume says you have management experience, but I have to wonder why someone like you would think you fit in here at Marshall and Reed." His emphasis on "someone like you" was unmistakable. Diana maintained her composure. "I have 6 years of experience in team management and project coordination. My previous teams exceeded their targets by—" "Yes, yes," Marcus interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "But our clients expect a certain image. You understand what I mean?" He smiled, but his eyes were cold. "However, we might have some positions that would be more suitable for you." As he spoke, Marcus moved even closer, pretending to reach for her resume, but accidentally brushing against her shoulder. Diana fought the urge to recoil, knowing she needed to document his behavior. "What positions did you have in mind?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Well," Marcus said, sitting on the edge of his desk, "we have some openings in our mailroom, or perhaps customer service. Those roles might be more appropriate for your background." He leaned forward. "Though I might be persuaded to consider you for something better if we got to know each other outside the office." Diana felt her stomach turn, but she maintained her role. "I'm interested in the management position I applied for, Mr. Stevens. My qualifications." "Your qualifications?" Marcus laughed. "Listen, honey, let me be straight with you. This is a prestigious company. Our clients expect to work with people who, well, let's say people who look more like me." He gestured to himself. "But I'm a generous man. Maybe we could discuss this over dinner?" Diana noticed him glancing at her left hand, checking for a wedding ring. She had purposely removed all jewelry for this interview. "I prefer to keep relationships professional," Diana replied firmly. Marcus's friendly facade dropped slightly. "That's your choice, of course. But you should know that being uncooperative can make it very difficult to find work in this industry." His threat was thinly veiled. He stood up and walked behind Diana's chair, placing his hands on its back. "You seem tense. You know, I have a great masseuse I could recommend." His fingers brushed against her shoulder. Diana stood up immediately, turning to face him. "I think we should continue this interview professionally, Mr. Stevens." "Sit down," he said, his voice harder now. "We're not finished." Diana remained standing. "I believe we are." Marcus's face darkened. "Listen here. Do you know how many of your kind come through here looking for jobs? I'm offering you an opportunity, but if you want to be difficult—" He stepped closer, trying to intimidate her with his height. Diana met his gaze steadily. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Stevens?" "Threatening?" He forced a laugh. "No, no. Just giving you friendly advice. Seattle's business community is small. It would be a shame if word got around that you're difficult to work with." Diana gathered her folder. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Stevens. This has been very illuminating." As she reached for the door, Marcus called out, "You're making a big mistake. You'll never get a job at this level. Know your place." Diana turned back one last time, memorizing every detail of his smug expression. She would remember it when she returned to this office, not as Diana Wells, but as CEO Diana Robinson. As she walked through the outer office, she noticed the receptionist smirking. Clearly, this was a regular occurrence. Diana made a mental note to review the employment records of every person who had enabled this behavior. In the elevator, Diana finally allowed herself to take a deep breath. Her hands were shaking with anger, but she had achieved her goal. Every inappropriate comment, every touch, every threat had been recorded. Marcus Stevens's days of harassing job candidates were numbered. The real work was about to begin. Diana sat in her hotel room that evening, carefully reviewing the recording from her interview. Her laptop screen showed multiple windows. One playing the audio, another displaying her notes, and a third with emails from other victims who had started reaching out. The first email had arrived just 2 hours after she left the office. Someone had recognized her despite her simple disguise and spread the word quietly among former candidates. Now her private email was filling with stories similar to her own. 23 complaints in just 6 hours, Diana muttered, rubbing her temples. Each story was worse than the last. Marcus Stevens had been harassing candidates for years, particularly targeting women of color. Her phone buzzed. It was Sarah Chen, the Asian woman from the elevator earlier that day. "Ms. Robinson, I heard you were the one in the office today." I didn't know it was you." Sarah's voice trembled slightly. "I've been trying to report Mr. Stevens for months, but nobody would listen." Diana switched her phone to record. "Tell me everything, Sarah. Start from the beginning." For the next hour, Sarah described her 3 attempts to interview at Marshall and Reed. Each time, Marcus had made inappropriate advances, suggested private meetings, and when rejected, had threatened to blacklist her in the industry. "He told me I should be grateful he was even considering me," Sarah said bitterly. "Said I should know my place like other Asian women." Diana documented every detail. "Did anyone else witness this behavior?" "The receptionist, Jessica. She sees everything, but she just laughs. Sometimes she even warns the white candidates about waiting times, but sends the rest of us in blind." After finishing with Sarah, Diana received another call, then another. By midnight, she had spoken with 12 former candidates. She organized their stories meticulously, creating a timeline of Marcus's escalating behavior. Her assistant, James, knocked on her hotel room door at 1 a.m., carrying fresh coffee and legal documents. "I pulled the hiring records like you asked," he said, placing a thick folder on her desk. "In the past 3 years, Marcus Stevens has interviewed 347 candidates. Want to guess how many people of color he's hired?" Diana looked up from her laptop. "Tell me." "0, not a single one." James spread out the papers. "But here's where it gets interesting. He's registered dozens of rejections as candidate withdrew application. These are all women of color who mysteriously decided they didn't want the job after interviewing." Diana clicked through her emails. Because they were harassed, threatened, or both. She pulled up a spreadsheet. "Look at this pattern. He schedules minority candidates for late afternoon, often making them wait hours. Then he suggests dinner meetings to further discuss the position." James nodded grimly. "I also found something else. 3 former candidates filed complaints with HR last year. All 3 reports mysteriously vanished from the system. I had to dig through backup files to find them." Diana stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. "Someone's been covering for him. We need to find out who." She returned to her desk and opened her CEO email account. Within minutes, she had sent directives to her legal team, a department, and external investigators. By tomorrow morning, they would begin a complete audit of the Seattle office's hiring practices. "What about the board meeting?" James asked. "It's scheduled for next week." Diana smiled grimly. "Move it up. I want everyone there tomorrow at 2 p.m. And James, make sure Marcus Stevens is in attendance. You'll want to come. He never attends board meetings, but insist. Tell him it's about a promotion if you have to." As James left to make arrangements, Diana turned back to her documentation. She organized the evidence into clear categories: discrimination, sexual harassment, threats of retaliation, and cover-ups. Each category was backed by multiple witness statements, email records, and her own recorded experience. Finally, at 3 a.m., she opened one last file on her laptop. It contained her original business plan for Marshall and Reed, written when she first considered buying the company. She scrolled to the section about company culture and added a new note. "Cultural revolution needed. Start with Seattle office. Make an example that ensures this never happens again." Diana closed her laptop and looked at the sunrise beginning to paint the sky. In less than 12 hours, Marcus Stevens would walk into that board meeting confident and arrogant, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. She had given him every chance to treat her with basic human dignity. He had chosen to show his true character instead. Now he would face the consequences. The next morning, Marshall and Reed's Seattle office buzzed with unusual activity. Staff whispered about the emergency board meeting, wondering what could be so important. Marcus Stevens strutted around the 15th floor, telling everyone who would listen about his expected promotion. James from corporate called last night. He bragged to Jessica, the receptionist. "They specifically requested my presence. It's about time they recognized my talents." He straightened his expensive tie, grinning. Maybe they finally noticed how I've kept this office's standards high. Meanwhile, Diana Robinson was in a temporary office 3 floors down, preparing for the confrontation. She had changed back into her CEO attire, a tailored black suit, elegant jewelry, and her natural hair styled confidently. Gone was any trace of the meat job applicant from yesterday. Everything is ready, James reported, placing several folders on her desk. The board members are arriving early as requested. They're in the main conference room on the 20th floor. Diana nodded, reviewing her presentation one last time, and the other arrangements. All set. HR representatives from corporate are here. Security is on standby. The lawyers are present, and... James paused, checking his tablet. 3 of the women who filed complaints have agreed to wait in the adjacent room, ready to testify if needed. Sarah Chen had arrived early, her hands shaking as she sipped water in the waiting room. She had brought additional documentation, screenshots of inappropriate messages Marcus had sent her after her interviews. These would be the final nails in his coffin. At 1:30 p.m., the board members sat around the massive conference table, murmuring among themselves. None of them knew why they'd been summoned so urgently. Diana had only told them it concerned a serious personnel issue. The IT team reports they backed up all of Marcus's emails and computer files. James whispered to Diana, "We found dozens of inappropriate messages to candidates. He wasn't even trying to hide them." Diana checked her watch. "And the security cameras? We have footage from the lobby showing how differently candidates were treated based on their race, plus yesterday's footage of your interview. The camera angle clearly shows him touching you inappropriately." Through the glass walls, Diana could see Marcus arriving on the 20th floor. He was practically bouncing with excitement, stopping to straighten his tie in the reflection of a window, the same tie he'd worn yesterday while harassing her. "Remember when he said clients expect to work with people who look like him?" Diana asked quietly. James nodded. "It's all on tape." "Well, let's see how he feels about working with people who look like me." She stood up, gathering her materials. "Is everyone in position?" "Yes, security is by every exit. HR has the termination papers ready. The PR team is on standby for the press release. And..." James smiled slightly. "We've already changed the codes to his office and frozen his access to company systems." Diana took a deep breath, remembering all the women whose careers Marcus had damaged or destroyed. She thought about Sarah Chen, waiting nervously in the next room. She thought about the young black women who'd given up their dreams after facing Marcus's harassment. "Ms. Robinson?" James looked concerned. "Are you ready?" Diana squared her shoulders. "More than ready. Let's make sure Marcus Stevens never has the chance to hurt another candidate again." Through the glass, she watched Marcus glad-handing board members, completely unaware of what was coming. He was telling them some story, gesturing grandly, making them laugh. The same charm he'd used to hide his behavior for years. "It's time," Diana said, picking up her folders. "Send him in last. I want him to see me at the head of the table before he can react." As she walked toward the conference room, Diana thought about yesterday, how Marcus had made her wait, had touched her without permission, had threatened her career. He'd done the same to countless others, confident in his power, certain there would never be consequences. "That ends today," Diana whispered to herself. She pushed open the conference room doors, her heels clicking authoritatively on the marble floor. The board members turned to her with respect, several rising from their seats. Through the glass, she saw Marcus's face change as he recognized her, first confusion, then shock, and finally, fear. The trap was set. Justice was about to be served. Marcus Stevens stood frozen in the doorway of the conference room, his face draining of color. The confident smirk he'd worn all morning vanished as he stared at Diana Robinson, the same woman he'd harassed just yesterday, now sitting at the head of the board table in CEO attire. "Mr. Stevens," Diana said calmly, "please join us. We have much to discuss." Marcus's legs seemed to move on their own as he stumbled to the only empty chair, directly opposite Diana. The board members watched curiously, sensing the tension but not yet understanding its source. "For those who haven't met me in person," Diana began, her voice clear and strong, "I'm Diana Robinson, CEO of Marshall & Reed. Yesterday, I visited our Seattle office undercover as a job applicant named Diana Wells. She pressed a button on her laptop, and the large screen behind her came to life. The security camera footage from yesterday's interview began to play. The board members watched in horror as Marcus's inappropriate behavior unfolded on screen. "Turn that off," Marcus suddenly shouted, half rising from his chair. "Sit down, Mr. Stevens," Diana commanded. Her voice could have frozen fire. "You seemed quite confident yesterday when you told me to know my place. Now it's time for you to know yours." The color that had left Marcus's face returned in an angry flush. "This is a setup. You tricked me." "Did I trick you into harassing me?" Diana asked quietly. "Did I trick you into touching me without permission? Did I trick you into suggesting dinner meetings in exchange for job considerations?" She opened the first folder in front of her. "Or perhaps I tricked you into doing the same to Sarah Chen, or Maria Rodriguez, or the other 23 women who've come forward in just the last 24 hours?" The board members were now staring at Marcus with undisguised disgust. James entered the room silently, placing more folders in front of each board member. "In these folders," Diana continued, "you'll find 3 years of hiring data. Mr. Stevens has interviewed 347 candidates of color. He hired 0. You'll also find documented complaints that mysteriously disappeared from HR records. And most importantly, you'll find statements from women who were brave enough to come forward." Marcus jumped to his feet again. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove anything." Diana pressed another button. Marcus's own voice filled the room. "Listen, honey, let me be straight with you. This is a prestigious company. Our clients expect to work with people who, well, let's say people who look more like me. We have everything on record, Mr. Stevens," Diana said as Marcus slumped back into his chair. "Every threat, every inappropriate touch, every discriminatory comment. The only thing I find truly remarkable is how long you got away with it." She turned to the board members. "This stops today. Not just Marcus Stevens, but the entire culture that protected him. Jessica, the receptionist who helped discriminate against candidates, terminated. The HR staff who buried complaints, terminated. The managers who looked the other way, terminated. Marcus tried one last time. You're making a mistake. Our clients?" "Our clients," Diana cut in, "have already been notified of the changes we're making. Would you like to know their response?" She held up her phone. "Our 3 largest clients are run by women. 2 of them are women of color. They're thrilled we're finally cleaning house." She nodded to James, who opened the conference room door. 2 security guards entered, along with an HR representative holding paperwork. "Marcus Stevens, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. If you contest this termination or threaten any further retaliation, the video evidence of your behavior will be turned over to the authorities and the press." Marcus looked wildly around the room, but found no allies. The board members were already reading through the evidence, their faces showing increasing anger at each page. "You can't do this to me," he whispered, but his voice held no power now. Diana stood up, her full height and presence commanding the room. "I'm not doing anything to you, Mr. Stevens. Your own actions, your own words, your own choices have brought us here. I simply gave you the opportunity to show your true character, and you did." She turned to the security guards. "Please escort Mr. Stevens out, and make sure he takes that tie with him. He won't be needing a tie at his next job." The hours following Marcus Stevens' termination transformed the Seattle office of Marshall and Reed. Security guards moved methodically through the building, escorting out Jessica the receptionist and 3 HR managers who had helped cover up the discrimination. Employees watched in stunned silence as boxes were packed and access badges were collected. Diana Robinson stood at the window of what had been Marcus's office, watching him being escorted out of the building. His expensive suit looked wrinkled now, his confident strut replaced by shuffling steps. As he reached his car, he looked up at the building one last time. Diana met his gaze steadily until he lowered his head and drove away. "The press release is ready for your approval," James said, entering the office with his tablet. "And Sarah Chen is still waiting to speak with you." Diana nodded. "Send her in, and James? Have facilities remove everything from this office. I want it completely empty by morning." Sarah Chen entered nervously, still carrying her folder of evidence. She stopped short when she saw the empty desk and the boxes being carried out. "Is it really over?" she asked quietly. Diana gestured to the chairs by the window. "It's over for Marcus Stevens, but our work is just beginning. Please, sit down. I'd like to talk about your future with the company." Sarah's eyes widened. "My future?" "Yes." Diana smiled. "I've reviewed your original application from last year. 3 graduate degrees, fluent in 4 languages, and an impressive track record in project management. Marcus Stevens may not have seen your value, but I do." She handed Sarah a folder. "This is a job offer. Senior project manager position, reporting directly to our new regional director, once we hire one. The salary is double what you would have made in the position you originally applied for." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the folder. "But why?" "Because you're qualified. Because you were brave enough to speak up. And because Marshall and Reed needs leaders who understand the importance of integrity and equal opportunity." Down in the lobby, a team was already removing Marcus's name from the directory board. On each floor, its specialists were changing security codes and passwords. The company's website was being updated, removing Marcus and his entire leadership team from the executive pages. Diana's phone buzzed constantly with messages from other offices around the country. The news was spreading fast. She had received 16 emails from other employees reporting similar discrimination in their branches. "We'll need a larger investigation team," James noted, reading over her shoulder. "Get me the best civil rights lawyers in each state where we operate," Diana replied. "I want every office audited, every complaint investigated, every instance of discrimination documented and addressed." She turned back to Sarah, "Which brings me to my next question. How would you feel about joining our new Ethics and Hiring Practices Committee? We need people who have experienced discrimination firsthand to help reshape our corporate culture." Sarah sat up straighter. "I would be honored." "Good." Diana handed her another folder. "These are the resumes of everyone Marcus rejected in the past year. I'd like you to review them personally. Anyone who was qualified but rejected for discriminatory reasons should receive a new interview." As Sarah left with her new assignments, Diana clicked through her emails. 3 major business magazines were requesting interviews about the changes at Marshall and Reed. 2 civil rights organizations had reached out to offer support and resources. And most importantly, dozens of employees were coming forward with their own stories. "Should I cancel your meetings for the rest of the week?" James asked. Diana shook her head. "No. Schedule town halls in every office. I want to speak to all employees directly. They need to know that the changes happening in Seattle are just the beginning." She walked to the box of items from Marcus's desk. On top was a framed photo of him shaking hands with the previous CEO, both of them smiling, both of them white men in expensive suits. Diana picked up the photo and dropped it in the trash. "Have facilities turn this office into a meeting room," she decided. "Glass walls, round table, open to everyone. Name it the Equal Opportunity Conference Room." As the sun set over Seattle, Diana watched more boxes being carried out of the building. Each one contained the remnants of an old, discriminatory system that had protected people like Marcus Stevens for too long. Tomorrow, the real work of rebuilding would begin. But tonight, somewhere in Seattle, Marcus Stevens was learning a lesson he'd never forget. Karma eventually finds everyone, and sometimes it arrives wearing a CEO's badge. 1 month after Marcus Stevens' termination, the Seattle office of Marshall and Reed was unrecognizable. The dark wood panels and closed doors had been replaced with glass walls and open spaces. Where Marcus's large private office once stood, a bright conference room now hosted daily team meetings with employees from all backgrounds. Diana Robinson sat in this new Equal Opportunity Conference Room, reviewing the progress reports with Sarah Chen, now the head of the Ethics and Hiring Committee. The walls around them were covered with new company values and statistics showing the changes of the past month. "We interviewed 63 candidates who were previously rejected by Marcus," Sarah reported, spreading out the files. 47 were highly qualified for their positions. "So far, we've hired 32 of them." Diana nodded, looking at the diverse faces in the new employee photos. "And the others?" "Found better positions elsewhere," Sarah smiled. "But they all appreciated being contacted and getting a fair chance." Some even cried when we called to apologize for their previous experience. The door opened, and James entered with more files. "You'll want to see this," he said, placing a newspaper on the table. The headline read, "Former Executive Files Lawsuit Against Marshall and Reed." Diana picked up the paper calmly. "Marcus is suing us. He claims discrimination," James said, trying not to laugh. "Says he was targeted because he's a white male." Sarah looked worried, but Diana just smiled. "Perfect. This gives us a chance to make all our evidence public. Our lawyers will be thrilled." Outside the conference room, the office buzzed with positive energy. The new receptionist, a young man in a wheelchair, greeted visitors warmly regardless of their appearance. The HR department, now led by a diverse team of professionals, had implemented blind resume screening to ensure fair evaluation of all candidates. "The regional numbers are in," Sarah continued. "Since the changes began, employee satisfaction is up 47%. Productivity has increased by 32%. 3 major clients have increased their contracts specifically because of our new inclusive policies." Diana stood and walked to the window, remembering how Marcus had stood in the same spot just a month ago, looking down on others with contempt. Now, the view showed a transformed workplace. "What happened to Jessica?" Sarah asked quietly. "The former receptionist." "Interesting story," James replied, checking his tablet. "She tried to get a job at Wilson and Associates, but their HR department had heard about what happened here. She's working at a small company now, at entry level. Apparently, she's learning some valuable lessons about treating people with respect." Diana turned back to the table. "And Marcus?" "Can't find work in corporate America," James reported. "The video evidence we submitted with our legal response went viral. No major company will touch him. Last I heard, he's working at his brother's small business, handling paperwork in the back office." Sarah began gathering her files. "The karma is satisfying, but the real victory is the lives we're changing. Yesterday, I interviewed a young black woman for a senior position. She told me she'd given up hope of breaking into corporate management until she heard about what happened here." Diana's phone buzzed. It was a message from the board. They had unanimously approved her proposal to expand the anti-discrimination initiative nationwide. Resources would be available immediately to audit and reform all Marshall and Reed offices. "Schedule a company-wide video call for tomorrow," Diana told James. "It's time to take this transformation national." As the day ended, Diana watched her employees leaving the office. Unlike a month ago, they were smiling, talking with each other, showing no fear or tension. The cleaning crew, once instructed by Marcus to work only after hours, now moved freely through the office, treated with respect by everyone they met. In the lobby, she passed by the wall where Marcus's portrait used to hang. Now it displayed a large photo of the entire Seattle team, every color, age, and background represented, all standing together proudly. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from an unknown number. It was a former employee who had left years ago because of Marcus's harassment. "I saw the changes you're making," the message read. "Thank you for giving others the chance I never had." Diana typed a quick reply. "It's never too late for a second chance. Would you like to come in for an interview?" As she walked to her car, Diana remembered Marcus's words from that interview. "Know your place," she smiled. Thanks to his own actions, he had finally learned his place. And thanks to his downfall, hundreds of qualified people were finally finding theirs. The sun set behind the Seattle skyline, casting a golden glow over the Marshall and Reed building. Inside, the lights still burned as Sarah conducted another evening interview, giving another candidate the fair chance they deserved. 6 months after Marcus Stevens' termination, Diana Robinson stood on stage at the National Business Leadership Conference. The audience of 3,000 business leaders waited silently as she prepared to give the keynote speech about corporate transformation and equality. In the front row, Sarah Chen sat with 20 other Marshall and Reed employees, a diverse group that represented the company's new face. They had all been part of the change, and each had their own story of transformation to share. 6 months ago, Diana began, I went undercover in my own company. What I found was a culture of discrimination that had destroyed countless careers and dreams. Today, I want to tell you what happened next. The giant screen behind her showed before and after photos of the Seattle office. The old images showed a workplace dominated by one type of employee. The new photos revealed faces of every color, age, and background. Our company's transformation began with one man's downfall, Diana continued. But it became something much bigger. It became a movement. She clicked to the next slide, showing the company's new statistics. Employee diversity up 312%. Overall productivity increased 67%. Company profits up 89%. Employee satisfaction at record highs. Zero discrimination complaints in 6 months. In the audience, a familiar face caught Diana's attention. Marcus Stevens' former assistant was there, representing her new company. She had been hired as a CEO at a smaller firm, specifically to implement anti-discrimination policies. She smiled and nodded at Diana, both of them knowing how far things had come. But numbers don't tell the real story, Diana said. The real story is about people. The screen changed to show Maria Rodriguez, who Marcus had rejected 3 times. She was now regional director of operations. Then came David Chen, a brilliant analyst who had been stuck in entry-level positions. He now led the company's Asian Pacific division. We didn't just change policies, Diana explained. We changed lives. We proved that talent doesn't have a specific color, gender, or background. We proved that true leadership means giving everyone a fair chance. In the back of the hall, a reporter wrote quickly in his notebook. Tomorrow's headline would read, Marshall and Reed sets new standard for corporate equality. Diana clicked to her final slide. It showed a small coffee shop across from the Seattle office. This morning, I had coffee here, and I saw something interesting. The photo zoomed in to show Marcus Stevens sitting alone at a small table. He was reading the business section, which featured an article about Marshall and Reed's soaring success. Our former manager now works as a bookkeeper at his brother's shop. He hasn't found another corporate job. His lawsuit against us failed when we released the evidence of his behavior. That's not the important part. She clicked again, showing Marcus watching through the coffee shop window as diverse groups of Marshall and Reed employees walked past, laughing and talking together. The important part is that he has to watch, every single day, as the people he tried to keep down rise up and succeed. That's not punishment. That's education. Diana moved away from the podium, speaking directly to the audience. Today, Marshall and Reed is the fastest-growing company in our sector. Our success proves that diversity isn't just morally right, it's good business. When you give everyone a fair chance, everyone wins. She gestured to her team in the front row. These leaders beside me aren't successful because we gave them a chance. They're successful because they always had the talent. We just finally got out of their way. The audience rose in a standing ovation. In the weeks that followed, hundreds of companies would contact Marshall and Reed, asking for advice on implementing similar changes. Later that evening, Diana stood in her office, looking at a small frame on her wall. It contained the simple resume she had used when going undercover. Diana Wells, job applicant. Next to it hung her CEO nameplate. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Just hired 2 more candidates Marcus had rejected. Both absolutely brilliant. His loss, our gain. Diana smiled and typed back. Perfect. Tell them welcome to the new Marshall and Reed. As the sun set over Seattle, Diana watched employees leaving the office. Some were heading to a group dinner, young and old, multiple races, different backgrounds, all laughing together. Through the coffee shop window across the street, she could see Marcus watching them too. He had told her to know her place. Now everyone knew theirs, right at the top, where talent and hard work could take them, regardless of how they looked or where they came from. The lesson had been learned. The change was permanent. And somewhere out there, the next Diana Wells was walking into a job interview, ready to be judged on her merit, not her appearance. That was the greatest victory of all.